Welcome to the Creative Tools Podcast. My name is Ashay, and I'm immensely passionate about using technology for creativity. On this podcast, I talk to various creators about what tools and technology they use to be creative. My guest today is Chaitanya Godsay. Chaitanya is a software professional who has been active in theater for about 25 years. He loves directing and acting in plays and also has ventured into creating short films. During the recent pandemic, when theater productions could not be staged live, he worked on some innovative ideas to bring the live experience to virtual audiences. He believes constraints are helpful in bringing out the best creative solutions and sees them as opportunities to think out of the box. Hello, Chaitanya. Thanks for visiting my podcast.
Of course, glad to be here, Akshay. Ashay, sorry, let's repeat it.
That's okay. So let's dive right in. My first question is, what do you create?
What do I create? So I have largely been focused on theater. So I do a lot of theater. I act in plays. I direct plays. I have written some plays, not that many, and I also create short films. That's largely everything that I've done.
So has your focus have been mainly on theater or films?
Mostly in theater. That was the most accessible medium for me for a long time. And recently, actually, because of you, I've gotten more into short films. So as you know, and that I've enjoyed that process a lot. Yeah.
So so let's kind of focus right now on the theater director part
Sure.
for this podcast. So and since you have done films, you know about this. There are three steps in filmmaking: pre-production, production, and post-production. So I want to focus on something similar for this interview. So pre-creation, creation, and post-creation. Let's talk about those three phases.
Okay.
And let's start talking about the pre-creation part. So for pre-creation, I am mainly interested in understanding the inspiration that you get to direct plays. How do you record the inspiration, and how do you retrieve it when you want access to it?
Okay. So these three phases will be different in theater, because I would say pre-creation would be essentially just getting the idea and writing the script or finding a script, right? Because many times you're finding scripts. So a lot of it involves reading. So, I mean, in some ways, finding scripts is a challenge, like I think interestingly, because they're not, depending on the language you want to find it in, it becomes a challenge. Many times, like we try to find physical books. Nowadays, I think with online, we're trying to find online books as well, right? Or online scripts, existing books. So that'll be more the kind of what I would say pre-creation phase. But what really I'm looking for there is, like, what kind of story do I want to tell, right? Does it appeal to me? Is there an angle that could be unique that I could present? That is the primary criteria for a lot of these things. So then you pick different genres and read around different genres. Sometimes you pick different authors and just kind of read everything that they have done if you like that author, right? So those are some of the techniques we use there. None of them are technology. I think the maybe only technology focused part would be, if you're writing a script, then there's probably two things we would do. One of them is actually, I'll cover one aspect which will be related to technology. So many times we find scripts in a different language, right? It would be in English or a different language, or it could be Marathi, and then you want to translate it, right? So, or if you have a play, and so for instance, we do Marathi plays, right, or Hindi plays, and we have audiences who might not understand Marathi or Hindi, so we then create super titles for it, right? So for those things, actually, we have started using Google Translate, which is a pretty decent tool. Like, it has like significantly improved in the past, I think, particularly the past 3 years, where we can take again, you have to still work through it, but at least you can take like blobs of text and convert it. The basic level conversion is reasonably good, and then you can then edit it to make it right. So I think that is a very useful tool, which is Google Translate, which I've used multiple times to kind of translate scripts as well. So I think that would be more on the pre-creation side in
So
terms of
I think I want to go even upstream of
Mhm.
this. So let's say you have encountered a script, and you don't necessarily have access to talent or access to realize that script on stage.
Mhm.
So you must be recording it or keeping a record of it somewhere,
Mhm.
and then accessing it later when you think you can make that script a reality. So in these situations, like, where do you record that inspiration, that script that you came across, and how do you remember maybe years later that you had that script, and
Oh, interesting, interesting. Yeah.
how do you get access to it?
Yeah. So if I find a good script, I've been using Google Drive as well, right? So I think most of it are saved as Google Drives. And then uh, in general, I think remembering is not a problem. Like I have like a finite number of things. I haven't run into, oh, I have these hundreds of ideas and hundreds of scripts, and which one should I be looking for? So usually I just save them on Google Drive, and I mean, it's reasonably straightforward to remember like which one you're looking for, right?
Do you only look at them when you have to make a creation, or do you look at them just at a particular cadence without even, when you are even not creating?
Yeah, yeah. Ideally, I should do that. It doesn't happen that way.
Okay.
So many times it is, oh, I have to read this, I have to read this, but it's like in the backlog, right? And then usually, like again, I like constraints, right? So once there's a constraint, oh, we have to do this play, like there's an opportunity to stage a play, then we go back and then I'll read a bunch of them in rapid succession, right? Until I find something that I'm interested. So yeah, it happens that if somebody says, oh, this is a nice script, then I will remember it or buy it or whatever, right? So I'll try to procure it. And depending on time, I might or might not read it right away, right? So I think, so in some ways it turns into a bit of like collect for a while, then when an opportunity presents, then you figure out what you want to do at that point of time.
but
Because
that
then,
but that basically means that the scripts that you are preserving in your repository, you need to know what each script demands,
yes.
and then but you do you record it, or it's just in your head and
No, it's
you
just in my head. I don't
okay.
write it anywhere. So I think once I read it, so I do give it a like a skim read. Like I generally understand what it would be about or what the style of writing is, because depending on where you're performing or what kind of format it is, right? So we do
Hmm.
a couple of, like, you can have a stage play or you can have what we do as theater in a room, which is a very different kind of intimate theater experience. So depending on that, your script changes. Some, like with COVID, so occasionally we some of us did like an outside play, right? Like in
Hmm.
a amphitheater. So then
Hmm.
again, there's a different kind of play. So based on the venue, based on what kind of audience you tune what you're looking for.
Okay. So let's talk about the creation aspect now. So for creation, I will tell you my experience. You
Mhm.
tell me if you resonate with this or you
Yeah,
have
yeah.
some other experience. So my experience is, whenever I'm creating something, I want to build a prototype of that creation as fast as possible.
Mhm.
There are many decisions involved in creating that prototype. But when I'm creating the prototype by hand in front of my eyes, the actual creation gets built in my head.
Mhm.
So especially for films, the film is already ready in my head before even it's shot, because
Yeah, yeah.
that's the thing that as a director I practice a lot for that.
Right, right.
And then the next step in creation is shaping the prototype. So basically removing everything that's unnecessary so that you can uncover the creation that you are seeing in your head.
Yeah.
So those two steps I very much go through for creation. So do you also go through similar steps, or do you have some other experience?
Yeah, so I think this would be then working on the play, right? So I won't talk about like auditions and all that. So assume we have actors and everything, right? But so one of the things I do is I read the script every day when I'm like setting it, right? Because every time you read the script, you learn something new, and it gives you a lot more insight. I want to be the person who has read the script the most number of times, right? As a director, like, I mean, I need to know all angles of it. And second thing is, uh, my idea is a bit different. What I do is I decide what is the story I want to tell. Like I should be able to, I call it the North Star. Like what do I want to communicate from this
Hmm.
play, right? and I can explain it in 1 or 2 lines. Like it's very clear in my head what I'm going for. And then it's a pattern of making sure that all the sequences are interesting and they flow within the theme that we have in mind, right? So a lot of you need as a director, I think you need a lot of clarity around what the intent of the play is, like what you want to communicate to the audience. And so and the second part that is important for me is I work with actors where I want them to bring something to the table, right? So I give them like the general framework. I rarely try, I mean, even though I could, I rarely try, I almost never show them what they should be doing. I give them the framework of what they should be doing, and then guide them to kind of bring their creativity into it, right? So that's how what will happen is I firmly believe that depending on the set of actors you have, the whole play could feel very different, although the message could be exactly the same, right? So I think that's the beauty of like what actors add to it. So I work a lot with actors to kind of bring out those nuances, and I really encourage them to think about it, because I feel that if they think about it, then it's a lot more natural performance, right? So I think that's the key. Rather than copying something, they have something that they have thought about, right? So it's a lot more natural, and it shows everywhere in the play, right? So that's how I kind of work through it, where within a play, I have techniques around like what's the intent of the audience. There's usually a driver of every scene, right? Or it might flip flop within the scene. So I just work with actors very closely like that. But at the end of the day, it is communicating a story to the audience. And when I get feedback from the audience, I usually ask that question, okay, like what did the story feel like, right? Or what were the characters feel like? I very rarely ask about like, what did you think? Because I think it's a very kind of not a great question. I'm really trying to look for, if I was shooting for a certain character to be portrayed in a certain way, is that what is being communicated at the end, right? For a person who has not seen it at all. Or if this was my intent, then is that what is getting communicated in the end? So that's basically how I kind of work through the process.
So you mentioned a very good point that as a director, as a theater director, you need to have the clarity of the script the most.
Yeah.
So to get that clarity, what tools do you use?
Oh, that's a great
Do
one.
you?
So I've done things that are what we would call similar to like story maps, right? So sometimes you're just thinking, oh, these, because sometimes scripts are very layered and you're trying to like figure out
Mhm.
there are multiple stories and you have to figure out which ones to highlight or which character to highlight. So I think I've done essentially what is a story map, where like I would maybe have a character journey or an arc, but it's all just visual, right? So I'm just like drawing it out on a paper. And then or you could say like the way you have like the stage of film, right? Like so there's a certain kind of pattern
Mhm.
you follow. So similarly, I think I would do it for either the characters or the storyline, right? So I think that is something that you use. But a lot of it is to just get the clarity from the script, right? So once you have it, then I think you can work with it. I don't need the tool after it, but it's sometimes useful to visualize it, and sometimes it's helpful to share it with the actors as well, right? Or your producer, in terms of like what you're kind of looking for, because there might be certain moments in the areas in the play where you might even have your production designer or somebody else who's setting up the stage, or like, hey, this is what's important, so I wanted to enhance this part or that part, right? So that is like a visual tool that is helpful, but it is just drawing on a paper, right?
So you draw on paper with.
Yeah. It
I
would be
mean,
a graph. So let's say if it's
okay.
a character, then it would be like a graph line going up or down in terms of their emotional journey, or if it's a storyline, I might like put key points in the storyline as to how I want it to progress, or which areas to highlight within a script.
One of the differences, like major differences that I see between theater and film is in theater, the space is constant, whereas in film, space is variable. So films, you have to think in terms of time, uh, the chronology. Whereas theater, yes, there is time, there is chronology, but space is constant. So the clarity of space and how um, actors and your talent is moving across that space is something that could be useful for theater. So do you do any kind of that exercise of understanding how the space will be used?
So there's definitely visual compositions, right? So I think around power dynamics, if somebody is
Hmm.
you want to show somebody in a slightly more power, and these are subtle, like I think as audience you don't realize it, they're more
Right,
subconscious, and yeah, as a filmmaker, these things exist, right? Like camera angle lower or
right.
higher and stuff like that. So same idea in theater is what are the visual compositions, right? So usually you display power by somebody standing up and the other person lower or sitting down or whatever
Mm,
pose you want, right? But visually they are higher than the other person, things of that nature. And one of the things I think, since you talked about theater and film, like theater is a make-believe medium, right? Like I can say, oh, there's rain, and I act in a certain way, and you'll feel that there's rain. There's no rain actually, like, but even as an audience, we appreciate that an actor is able to create or evoke the emotion of actually there's rain and like he's getting wet in the rain or anything of that nature. Um, Whereas a film, in contrast, is a very concrete medium, right? You can't like pretend it's rain. You have to like
mm,
show there is rain. Like
mm-hmm,
the water has to be there. It has to be like so you have to create everything in literally in a
mm,
film. Whereas I think in theater, the benefit is that it is a constraint that you are in that space, that is the space of the theater, but you have a lot of kind of flexibility provided by the audience and the format to kind of just create whatever experience you want, right? Because
mm,
that's just the talent of the actor and how you set up the stage and compositions, essentially. So we call it blocking, at least
mm-hmm,
where we block in a certain way. There's certain kind of dynamics around it. That left side of the theater tends to be like it will grab more attention than right side, and there's some kind of dynamics there that you kind of work through. And then there's a lot of things that you do via not only music but significantly more by lights as well, right? So one of
mm,
the beauties of theater is you can really enhance things with light. So that's where I think where technology is used a whole lot, right? I think how the stage setup is. Do you want spots, diffuse spots, exact spots? How do you want it to be? Do you want the moving light, types of light, colors of light? So there's like so many things we can do. And it's probably one of the most creative parts of enhancing the experience, right? I mean, I think the script has most value, right? Followed by actors, and then I think I would say music and lights would be then at the same level in terms of like enhancing the experience for a
so
viewer.
do you do any kind of previs for this experience?
Means like going to the theater or like
Not necessarily going to the theater, but like you had an idea, let's say, about a spotlight or a
Mhm.
different color of light for a
Yeah.
particular scene. Before you actually go in the theater and spend your time and
Mhm.
energy in seeing that in theater, do you do any previs?
Yeah. So it's generally a pretty standard. I mean, there's some tools that some of my friends, I forget actually the name of the tool. It's like a sketching tool.
Hmm,
So I work with a couple of people, but I'll get you the name for it. I want to say it's Sketch 3D, but I'm not entirely sure. It basically you can create the dimensions of the
hmm,
theater, right?
hmm,
And within that you can put like specific whatever furniture, whatever you have,
hmm,
right? Like a property, this
hmm,
that,
hmm.
and then you can actually basically replicate it for like the light you want, right? So you'll say, hey, the
Right.
spot is here, the spot is here, or it will transition this way. So you are able to then essentially not only visualize it yourself, but also for your team, you can show, hey, this is
Correct.
what I have in mind. So like you need to stand here, and this is why
Huh.
my blocking is this way, things of that nature. But it's I'll send you the name of the tool. I'm the name escapes me
Is it
right now.
made for theater, the tool that you're talking
No,
about?
I think it's actually like some architecture or
Architecture. Oh, is it like
software, right?
SketchUp or something? Like
SketchUp,
SketchUp?
yeah. I think it's probably
Oh,
SketchUp.
okay. Okay.
And in that, I think you can build light plans as well. I've seen some people do this in just a very like top view. Like for
Right.
light plans, actually, just a top view of the stage is good enough, and then you
Hmm.
can kind of just draw out the how you want the spots to be, right, or how what you want the lighting to be. Because all you're looking for is where you want which part to be lit, right, in what
Hmm.
way.
Hmm.
And the sequence of how you light it is a different thing, right? That's
Hmm.
where you program cues and all that. But at least you need to design this. So this is the lighting design part, which you can do. Basically, it could just imagine like a top-down view on one
Hmm. Hmm.
slide, and that's kind of you can draw the whole thing there.
And how important is this pre-visualization before you actually go and perform this
So
on stage?
so if you have to, so two different parts. If you are doing set design, then at that time you need to know the exact measurements of things, right? So I
Hmm.
think that's why I think if you're going to have somebody build your set, then you need to be very reasonably precise about it. Um, but if you're going to use standard furniture pieces, this is not usually a big deal, right? In terms of it's just like good to visualize it, but nothing else. For lights, depending on the light person, it can become quite important, particularly if you have like very complicated lights, right? Because I think
Hmm.
that is where you being on the same page as to what, because we usually, the way we write our cues are, it will be a collection of certain lights, right? So you have to basically be able to say, oh, like left front, and there might be 5 6 different cues that you want to mix together. So you and your light person need to be on exact same page, and again, like they might suggest some things too, right? Obviously, so you have to be
Mhm.
open to that. So it becomes a good medium to be able to collaborate with them.
Okay. And can you tell me a little bit about the super titles that you were talking about? Like, how do you make them and how do you show them
Yeah,
during
yeah.
the show?
So making is actually a combination of, I mean, as I said, Google Translate, right? So you would basically use that and create the super titles. And then what we have figured out in different theaters is usually we use the theater projector and only bring the top screen down, like just a few, like maybe 1/3 or even less than 1/3, maybe like 1/5 of from the top. Um, and what we have figured out is like essentially if you have black background, right, then it the way these 4K projectors work, black essentially means the whole thing is off, right? So it is basically no light. So we basically do black background and on that like print it with yellow, and you can do up to 3 lines per slide, right? So it is basically a Google or PowerPoint slide, which we know the exact dimensions for. So it fits in exactly at the top of the stage, right? So that is how we do super titles. But somebody has to run them, in the sense somebody has
Hmm.
to sit down and like click next along with the dialogue. So
Hmm.
that's like it's like a live performance for the person doing super titles as well, because they are with the play, doing it with
Hmm.
the play.
So I wonder how, I mean, these you are showing on stage.
Yeah, yeah.
I have been to Broadway in New York, and there for the Phantom of the Opera, they had an app, the theater app.
Hmm.
And obviously inside the theater, they want you to go in airport mode,
Okay.
but then you can connect to the theater Wi-Fi, and then
Ah,
when you're connected to the Wi-Fi in the theater app, as the character is speaking in front of you, the titles would appear on your
wow.
phone.
Okay. Yeah.
And but I wonder whether they were run by a person, or it was probably, I mean, Phantom of the Opera is probably running there for many years, so
Yeah,
it
yeah,
is
yeah,
very
yeah.
much synchronized,
Yeah,
maybe
yeah, yeah.
synchronized, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one of the things that happens is, I mean, again, we try our best, but actors sometimes like can like
Right,
switch lines, right, and all that
right,
stuff.
right.
So that's why I think running live is kind of beneficial. Like you can't just always timing it, because like you can't do it by time. So there probably is a live person involved. I would assume, right? I'm guessing at this point. Yeah.
And one of the things that uh, I can think the advantage of performing arts or performing in front of a live audience is the art can get generated in the vicinity of the audience right then and there. It's unlike film, where you are generating art well before your audience
Mhm.
sees it, and then you are basically just showing your baby.
Yeah, yeah.
But the art, sometimes the art is born in front of the audience right then and there
As a part of a live performance, you
as a
mean?
part of a live
Yeah,
performance.
yeah. Yeah.
So to enhance that experience for the actors themselves, or to motivate or to create an environment for generating art in front of the audience, is there anything that you do, or
Interesting.
um,
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the key things with particular live performance is, um, you have to create a good group, right? Like that gets along. I think a lot of it is just that, and I mean, we talk about chemistry a lot, but if you have 7 or 8% team who have never met each other, right? I mean, you cannot have chemistry whatever you try, right? How
hmm,
much you try. So a lot of it is just informal interactions, and over time, I think you create a group. So sometimes, I mean, I feel a lot of it is just based on like the work you're doing, right? Just the process of creating a play, right? Because it is, we usually do it in 8 weeks, like 2 to 3 days a week, like 2 3 hours together, kind of thing. There's some exercises and stuff that I occasionally go through, right? So that we also do, like role playing games and stuff like that. But really, it's just kind of getting them very comfortable with each other, right?
hmm,
And being able to trust each other, because then, like, I think what you're talking about, we call it like magic moments, right? Like something
hmm,
will happen on stage which you had
right,
not predicted, right? Like, I mean, I had a person on wheelchair, and suddenly something happens and his wheelchair is not moving anymore, right? So they have to adjust on stage
right,
and figure out what to do, right? So but if they do it in character, if they have been in that, then it like creates this like very kind of very pleasing kind of like they
right.
adjust to it, which is kind of the main part. So we work a lot on, hey, this might not work, that might not work, like how would you do, right? So even our rehearsals are more like live performances, from that perspective. So but I think it's really just getting a team to work together. I think that's the key part.
And let let's go back a little bit to the part where you mentioned that you spend some time in creating these clarity maps
Mhm.
of the content that you are working with, um, and let's say this you do that before you um, actually involve anyone
Okay.
in
Yeah. Mhm.
in that uh, in that play. So once you involve them, do you kind of add another layer to your visual, so that okay, now this character is actually this person,
Hmm.
and then um, maybe, I mean, the reason I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
asking is like
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
kind of did that for my film, where I had like several people auditioning for the same role, and I literally just put them together like
Oh, I
in a
see. I see.
PowerPoint
So kind
slide
of
or
a,
something
yeah.
like
Yeah.
that,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
just see that whether I see the chemistry, or whether I see
Yeah.
whether they whether I can see them as my act, as characters
As
that
your
I'm
characters.
as
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think I mean a lot of ways like the benefit of when you're auditioning is that you can actually do this right, like live with people. There's some
Hmm.
amount of like naturalness that has to be there between the two people anyway, and they have to look whatever character you have, right, husband or wife or
Right.
like father or son. So I think like at least that part you kind of go through. But yeah, but I think I'll maybe just in some ways I I have the assumption that once I add an actor, whatever like they will change some of how the what the final experience would be, right? So I'm actually quite open to that already, right? So I don't try to fit actors in the flow I have a flow which is kind of true to the storyline and true to the intent of the that I need to convey. um, but within that every actor will add their own thing, but it's still within the framework. Like they're not going to go way off and like add
Hmm.
something completely different, unless it is a different interpretation that I had not thought about. Then but I really like it, it is still consistent with what I want to communicate, and they're doing a really good job, then I might try to then like change my thought process around it.
And how about makeup for them? I mean, I don't know what kind of heavy makeup that
Mhm.
you have encountered for your creations, but do you do any kind of like look test or like a makeup test before you actually have them
Yeah, there's
perform?
I mean one of the benefits with theater is like the people are a bit far, right, most of the time. So I
Hmm.
think you can get away with, when it's compared to films where it's like so close you can't
Right.
cheat, right? I mean if I can't like suddenly be a young child, right? I mean it's not possible. But or mostly like you can't suddenly turn people old, right? And because it's very noticeable
Hmm.
in screen. Well, the benefits of theater is like you can pull off some of this stuff. So if you have a really good actor and they can pull off these things, it's like a good acting challenge as well. Then a lot of things can be done by makeup, right? So it's not, I wouldn't say heavy, it's like appropriate for the character you are looking for, right? So I think we can age somebody by 20 to 30 years without much problems in theater. Like
Hmm.
it's like totally fine because they're like reasonably far, but then their body posture, body action, body language has to reflect that, right? So I think we would practice it that way. But makeup enhances the experience overall. And also very important in lights to kind of at least enhance certain features, right? So it is very
Hmm.
visible, right? Because you're pretty far away, right? I mean, you're
Hmm.
at least like minimum 20 to 30 feet away, right? Like however
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
do it.
Hmm.
So it is used more as an enhancing and accentuating technique, right?
Hmm.
To kind of do this. And it does give you some benefit in terms of changing age or certain things or enhancing certain elements. But I wouldn't, yeah, I'd put it differently. Like uh, I always have a specific makeup in mind. Like I would never anybody go on stage without makeup. Even
Hmm.
though many times people say, oh, like I mean, my role is like just a regular guy. Like, why do I
Hmm.
need a makeup? But there's lots of things like you'll sweat, you'll do this, you'll do that.
Right.
So I think like a basic makeup is basically almost always important,
Right.
and it enhances the experience significantly.
Nice.
Yeah.
So let's
So,
talk about the
mhm,
post creation aspect now. So, how do you release, distribute, and market your creations?
yeah. So honestly, I think one of the challenges with theater is that even though we video record kind of like the content, um, I've always found it doesn't really give you the same experience as a live performance, right? It
Hmm.
always falls short, like, and to some degree significantly. So you have tried a few things like having multiple camera angles or just doing it for like to record, right? Like
Hmm.
not necessarily trying to record the play itself. Um, I don't think a lot of things have been really that successful. The thing that came closest where during COVID we started because we couldn't do live theater, right? So we
Hmm.
started doing I mean, it was, I mean, this you might like as a tool set and for your audience as well, which is we started essentially, we almost recreated a production studio in a garage, right? So basically, we had two cameras. It was going into a software called Open Broadcast Studio, right? Which basically gets two feeds. And then similar to what you would do in let's say a TV production house, right? You have the ability to switch cameras and like move those things, right? So we essentially would have like two cameramen who would be capturing different parts of like the play, right? And one person on the essentially who would call it like the director or editor, live editing in
Hmm.
some ways, where depending on which frame is better, like they would pick that frame, right, for storytelling as well, right? So this was like a very interesting experiment because I think I thought it came closest to having a live performance,
Hmm.
and also giving it a live performance feel, right? Because whenever you record from like 50 feet away and even if you try to do close-ups, it is still very flat, right? You cannot get different angles and all those things. So it was like kind of very exciting to kind of figure out how to do like these two cameras. They have to show up as video capture cards and like a whole set of things that you had to figure out. And also most of the backgrounds you could now project via green screen, right? So we were also using green screen and projecting different backgrounds on top of it, using property in front of it. So figuring out how exactly lighting, because lighting actually becomes much more important when you have green screen.
Hmm.
Because if you have patches of like dark or light, then the chroma key doesn't really work, right? When you
Hmm.
can see in the background. So how do you light it up? So it like I have some pictures where it's almost insane, right? We have these like 6 lights and like 50 feet of green screen and two cameras, like through two laptops and audio system and all that. But it was a lot of fun. I think we did quite a few plays like that. So that worked out pretty well in that phase, quite appreciated by a lot of audience. But for a regular play that we do in theater, we typically try to record it in kind of two camera angles and then one like a long shot and one maybe closer from a certain angle. We edit it that way. Typically, they're released on that organization's YouTube channel.
Hmm.
Like that is
Hmm.
the standard way of doing it. And largely the marketing value of it is really more just kind of to like for new people because these are all non-profit organizations, right? So
Hmm.
for them, what is important is like how do they engage newer people coming in so the organization keeps going, right? So a lot of it is that the value of it is mostly in newer people or existing people watching it
Hmm.
and kind of like being able to say, oh, these are the plays that this organization does, right? That's really
Hmm.
kind of the at least the ones I have been involved in have been more in the category of what are the quality of the plays you can
Hmm.
kind of showcase, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So hence I think how you edit it, how you kind of the level of professionalism or effort you put into it, it becomes important as well. But usually it's a YouTube channel and and we use Adobe. Most of people use Adobe Premiere Pro
Hmm.
to kind of edit it. Some people have used Movie Maker or something, but I think now I think Adobe Premiere Pro is like the default.
And marketing, do you use social media?
Yeah, I think the standard ones like Facebook, Instagram, and some people. Yeah, I think those are the two major ones. There's also email groups that a lot of these organizations have. I would say most of the ticket sales. I mean, I used to run one kind of nonprofit before, so usually about most bang for the buck is through your email list actually,
Hmm.
and then the people who you cast, like they usually will kind of end up selling quite some
Hmm.
tickets as well, right? So the crew and email list by far, right, by far will get you 90% there, and then 10% you can get from social media, as
Okay.
friends and family. Yeah.
What's the biggest challenge you face in your creation process?
Um, I would say I think like uh, it's more on the very upstream, right? So which is finding great scripts or writing great scripts. I think that's really kind of where these things are.
Hmm.
um, and and sometimes you have ideas, but then executing them and creating a script is also sometimes a challenge, right? So I think
Hmm.
finding writers to execute it would also be kind of part of it. But it's really more kind of idea creation. Like once I have the idea, I think developing it and kind of executing is not my problem. I think I'm like reasonably
Hmm.
good at, but finding an idea that really appeals to me, where I think like there's something to be said,
Hmm.
is somewhat more challenging. I would say.
Hmm. Uh, when these creations take place, do you feel lonely? And
Situations
when I
take
say
place.
lonely, I mean, do you feel like you need a companion to help you with the creative decisions that you are taking?
Interesting. Yeah, yeah. So actually, what is interesting, and this is something I would definitely share with you, Ashay, which is, um, because after doing films, right, there's definitely I can definitely relate a lot more to lonely, because in theater, everything is a group activity, right? Other than the fact that
Correct.
when you're reading the script, right, let's say, right, and finding and kind of a thing, and we have a partner there too, but generally once you get into we are going to produce this thing, like there's audition, there's people, there's production, there's actors, like there's different things. So every day, every week there's practice. So it is a very social activity, right? And I
Hmm.
think once I did like a couple of short films, what I realized was that all of that first part, all the way up to I would say shooting, right? Shooting day is true, right? I mean, to some degree, you always have a lot of this like activity, right? And then it's like extreme loneliness. If if you are the only person editing, you are kind of screwed. So that's when I realized that, oh my God, like what I actually realized enjoy in this creative process is being able to interact with somebody as well, right? I think like
Hmm.
that interaction actually quite important. So I can slog through some things, but I think I'm more creative when I'm with people, right? So I
Hmm.
think in those cases. So that's why I've probably reached out to you a few times to edit some of the things. But and for the recent one that I was kind of editing myself, but I just had to slog through it because I was going to finish it once myself. Um, but yeah, I'm realizing that a lot more. That I think I mean, I guess self-realization as part of doing things that you're doing is I'm a reasonably social person for creative endeavors, right? I need another person who I can bounce ideas off or kind of work with,
Hmm.
um, and uh, and I get a lot of kind of enjoyment from kind of doing that, right? So yeah, so the only loneliness is I think more in films and specifically in editing for me. And I think it once gets through that phase, right? Once at least you have a rough draft, and then you can still again interact with people. But like there's one part which is like completely on you, right? Like you just have to get through it at that point of time.
Right. And last question. So,
Yeah.
what is your vision for your creations? And what I want to understand is like the tools and technology that you see right now around you. Do you see yourself using that to some advantage that will help in your own creations in future?
Mhm. So at the end of the day, I think the vision is to kind of, for me, always has been to make people think, right? So after you watch one of my plays, the idea I would have like they think about the play, or you have kind of from your day-to-day existence, you have kind of taken them out, and you kind of have given them a different point of view, right? So if you can achieve this, I think I call them like compelling stories, where you have said something and you have provided an experience to people, right? So I think that's kind of what I shoot for, which I think I understand is a bit abstract the way I'm describing it. um, and then I think currently at least the tool landscape kind of works for me. I mean, there's certain parts where at least for plays, I don't think there's a lot of issues from that perspective. I think this is like reasonably sorted out. Um, in I think film editing, there's certain places where I think a lot of automation can be
Hmm.
invested into, right? So I think, and you and I have talked about that
Hmm.
as well. Like in certain areas, we can automate a whole bunch of stuff. So
Hmm.
yeah, that is another like lonely endeavor when you have to like merge
Yeah,
the
I know.
audios and videos and like sort it out in a certain format, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So that kind of is a pain. So I think those are areas that we can definitely enhance. So yeah, anywhere there is a automation, I would have. I mean, I'm a software engineer by profession as well. So I think we can automate like where you don't need a human. It probably can be done better by machines, right? So I think we should definitely do a lot more of that. Um, but I think the tools work pretty well nowadays in theater, even with lights. And I know you attended one of these shows day before. Like even though the lights are very complicated and you have like more than 110 lights per in certain theaters, like all of them configurable with light with different colors, etc. You can program them, right? So you can literally like program them where every cue to cue you can kind of just have them change gracefully over a period of 20 seconds, 10 seconds abruptly. So I think the technology around it is quite great, right? And even live audio, there's so many facilities to kind of like, because sometimes your audio tracks are or like audio balance is different, so you can even like the software to kind of make it right in the
Hmm.
theaters as well. So there's a lot of interesting and maybe the two people I connect you with we would be potentially the folks who do light and sound in theater, so maybe you
Hmm.
can talk to them.
Okay.
Particularly one of them is actually also produces the kind of the soundboards. So maybe we should talk to them, David. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Thanks a lot, Chaitanya, for your visit. Great talking to you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, and all the best for your podcast. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in. If you are a creator, I would love to talk with you. Please connect with me through my website or social media. See you in the next episode.